right.
Okay.
Time to kick it off.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Peter Poljan with Poljan Properties, and Danny Patsis and I are excited to walk you through a little bit about what does it take in order to buy in New York City. We're hoping that this might be a bit of an interactive discussion tonight. We brought some experts with us, John Skolnick, who's an attorney that we work with quite a bit, and then also Eric Stam. So they're gonna, and Eric works with us on the financing side, so they're gonna give us their insights as well. So you've got the real estate attorney as well as financing all together in one. So we hope that you've got some great questions, and we'll give you as much information as we can so that you have the education that you need in order to take advantage of the, what we believe to be an upcoming buyer's market. And we can talk to you a little bit about what's happening with the market.
So as Peter alluded to, we are seeing changes in the market, and in Manhattan and both Brooklyn, we are shifting into a buyer's market. As of yesterday's reports, we're officially in a buyer's market in Manhattan, and we're technically in a neutral market. So we're not that heavy into a buyer's market yet in Brooklyn. And this has to do with everything that's going on in the economy, interest rates that we're going to touch on a little bit later, hitting 7% as the date of this recording, and will likely increase a bit more for the foreseeable future.
I think as far as some of these like larger forces that are happening right now, I think it's important that we just sort of call it for what it is. Yes, everybody's talking about inflation. Yes, everybody's talking about interest rates increasing. And what does that bring to the market? The one thing that we all know that it brings is uncertainty, right? And so when people are uncertain, they sort of take a bit of a pause and they wait for a little bit more certainty until they make a decision as to what's really going to be happening or what's good for them, what's the right move for them. And I think a lot of you might also be experiencing that right now. It's normal, right? We're in this period of uncertainty, and so you're wondering, is it really a good time for me to buy? Should I be making this kind of investment when I don't really know what's going to happen next year or the year after that? And so we're here to help you, give you some of the tools to understand whether this does make sense for you. And if it doesn't, by all means, we are here for when the process does, or when it does begin to finally make sense for you, to make sure that we're there to support you, throughout that process. One of the things that we're finding, I think Eric will get into this a little bit, is that there is a little bit of a play here potentially in the near term, and we just talked about sort of larger forces here about what some of the buyers are considering doing right now, and that is, hey, I might not really get the best interest rate today, but I can try and negotiate on the price a bit today. And so if I can negotiate on the price during this time of uncertainty when you don't have the competition, you don't have the bidding wars that we were seeing even 6 or 7 months ago, earlier this year, plenty of bidding wars. And we don't have that same level of activity that we used to have. So one, you don't have the competition, so there's that ability to negotiate a bit more than what you had just a few months ago. And so there is a bit of an opportunity there if you are thinking longer term. If you have the idea that, well, maybe if I consider that I'm going to probably be in this place for 7 years, 8 years, 10 years, well, I could potentially get a pretty good price right now, and then over the next 5, 6, 7 years, when rates begin to come down again, presumably, then I can refinance. And that's what we saw a ton of people doing over the last 4 to 5 years when rates were so low. So there is a play there. It just I guess it sort of just begs the question whether that's the right play for you. Yeah. So some considerations.
There is that saying going around right now: marry the house, date the interest rate. So you get locked in at that purchase price, that lower price right now, and down the road you can then switch off, and Eric here can help you get a better rate down the road.
So I think that sort of gives us a little bit of where the market's at. I just generally speaking, I don't think that we're going to see a major collapse in pricing. I wouldn't expect that to happen. Maybe there is a bit of a discussion around whether it's going to be 5%, 7%. I don't think there's going to be more than 10%, frankly, because there's a lot. New York is this very special market in that, in order to buy in New York, a lot of co-ops, we're in a co-op right now, you need to prove that you can afford to live here. You need to have post-closing liquidity, and we'll talk about some of that stuff coming up. But the New York market is very resilient. And so I think, for buyers that are looking to try and get a deal, it might not be this massive deal that you might think you might get, but if you could get something that's 5, 6, 7% off the asking price, I think that's a pretty fair place to be.
Yeah.
At least in the near term, yeah.
Yeah, and over the last week or so, we've been negotiating again. Where over the last 2 years, it's been tough to get discounts on purchase prices. So we've been coming in 10% off without feeling bad about it, and getting counters
And getting results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The purpose of today is to walk you through a bit about what to expect throughout the process buying in New York City. So New York City is not like any other market. We have co-ops, and people are like, what are co-ops? We have colleagues in other markets, and they're like, I don't know what a co-op is. So we'll chat a little bit about what a co-op is versus a condo. And then obviously we have our townhouses, we have our mixed-use buildings, and so we're going to touch a little bit about what is the right fit for you and for your needs. So who here has experience purchasing in New York? I know we have one right here. Can you tell us a little bit about what that process was like?
How would you describe the process of buying in New York? Was it stressful? Was it easy? Was it seamless? How did it go for you?
It was definitely stressful. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There was a lot of different parties involved, from the brokers to lawyers to the mortgage people to, I don't know, they're way more people.
Managing agents, right? They get involved. Right. The board and the co-op, yes. Yeah.
It was really stressful, but it was 2016, and we actually went 10% above.
Okay. In order to get it. Yes.
Yeah, because there was, I guess, like that competitive.
Yep. That wasn't abnormal.
No.
Over the last few years.
I certainly hope it wasn't.
No. In fact, we sort of saw a peak in 2017. So things were still very, very active during that time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I didn't have anything in education like this. Like, if I had gone through something like this and had this sort of happen, it would have felt a lot better.
Oh, thank you.
The idea is, like, the more you know, the less stressed you have to be, right? And it's with anything. And so that's one of the things that we really try and do, is make sure that people are educated. They know what's coming up, they know when to expect it. And so it reduces some of the pitfalls and some of that stress along the way. And that's our job, right? Is to help make it as easy on you as possible.
Yeah. So if you open up your guide, you're going to see an 8-step process. We're going to chat a little bit through each step, and along the way, we're going to bring our friends Eric and John to give a little expert advice on how to get through their particular steps that they're involved in. So at the beginning, you're trying to determine what is right for you. Do you want to continue renting? Do you currently own and need to downsize? Do you need to upgrade? Do you need more space? Do you have kids that have gone off to college and you're empty nesters? So everybody has a different situation, and that it's for you to determine what you want to do. So, you want to look at what your finances look like. You want to look how liquid you are. You want to be able to ensure that you're looking at properties that you can actually afford. And that is when we strongly suggest that you speak with a professional that's a mortgage lender. So today we actually have Eric Stam with Bank of America with us, who's going to talk a bit about interest rates and what is expected for the application process.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks
Eric
for coming
Stam
by.
with Bank of America. Yes, this is basically where I take over, where Peter and Danny, they'll send someone over to me who's looking to buy, or they're not sure if they want to buy, if they can afford it. So I have an initial conversation with them, try and get an idea what kind of price range they're in and what they can afford. So I have an initial conversation with them, and then what I usually do is we drive them to what we have in what we call an online application. They click a link, they go to the online application, and it's just page by page. It's pretty user-friendly. Ask them, are you self-employed? Are you salaried? How much do you make? How much money do you have, whether it's retirement or liquid, stocks, bonds? And then once they complete the application, I'll get a notification and I go into the application, review everything. Then if they want a pre-qualification to know what they can afford, at that point we pull their credit, and then I have the application, I pull their credit, and I run it through something that's called an automated underwriting system. And it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to come back, and it gives me an answer. It either says accept or refer. If it's accept, they're automatically pre-qualified. And usually in the beginning conversations, I try to figure out what their high point is to figure out the most that they can afford, and then work backwards that way. So if the system says accept, then I know we're good there. And if Danny and Peter say, hey, can we go a little bit higher? I play with the numbers, run it through that automated underwriting system again. Presumably it'll come back accept, and we'll pre-qualify for a higher loan amount. Or if it comes back to refer, it just means we're outside of guidelines. Maybe they don't make enough money, or they don't have enough money. The debt to income ratio might be outside of guidelines. So I have a conversation with them to say, maybe you can't afford $1 million, and we have to back it back down to 800,000. And that's when the communication comes in, and I speak to these guys and say, hey, look, this is where their reach is, this is where they're comfortable, and this is what I can get the pre-qualification for you.
Can I ask a quick question,
Sure.
maybe just to help people understand? Because can you talk us through the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval?
Sure. Okay, so we have basically 2 levels. So the pre-qualification is just what I said. It's run through the system. If it comes back as accept, the system allows me to generate the pre-qualification letter. When it comes back, it also gives me something that's called findings. The findings tells me the exact documentation we'll need to put that loan into process. So our next level after pre-qualification is a pre-approval, where we take the loan, and based on all the information that we need to support the information in the application, I collect it from you and submit it into underwriting. One of the benefits of the market being a little slow is volume is down. So I'm getting fully blown pre-approval letters within 3 to 4 days, where a couple of years back it could be 2 to 3 weeks, because deals in process take priority over pre-approvals. But knowing that you're pre-qualified is good enough usually to put an offer in.
Yep.
But the pre-approval is ironclad. It's basically a commitment letter, as if it was a real deal, and then it'll be conditioned upon getting a contract in place, finding the property, and then getting an appraisal ordered. So it's a lot stronger. I don't know if I would say I would go not mortgage contingents in a deal like that.
Right.
John will tell you no. But it gives you a really high level of confidence. It's almost as good as cash, because you're approved. You know, not only do you meet the guidelines, but an underwriter has reviewed all of your documentation and has approved you based on that documentation, and it's a lot stronger. Do you agree?
So the documentation that they provided are like bank statements, their tax returns for the last couple of years, and then possibly an employment letter or employment verification. And,
Correct.
And then in addition to that, you're also looking at the debt to income ratio, right? So what is the general good debt to income ratio that you'd like to see, or that most banks will approve upon?
Okay, so debt to income ratio, just so you guys understand, is you take all the monthly housing debt plus anything. When we pull the credit report, we're pulling it for 2 reasons. One is for the credit score, and one is to show us what your monthly debt is. We add the monthly debt to the housing payment, and we divide that by your monthly income, all right? And for us, the guidelines are that has to be under 43%, which is a lot higher than a lot of co-ops, right?
Right, co-ops will say 20, 25%. That's what they want to see.
Right.
So
So
25% is generally their cutoff. Some of them might go up to 30, depends.
right. So in a lot of cases, it's easier to get $1 million mortgage than to get into a $1 million co-op apartment. So that's what we use, 43%. It could change depending on products, but that's pretty much the rule of thumb.
Okay.
And Eric, do you have a credit score that you look for?
Yeah, depending on the product, but usually 680 is probably the lowest, maybe 660, depending on the person's profile. But the other thing with credit scores is it affects the interest rate. So you want to get your scores up as much as possible, because the higher the scores, the better the interest rate you're going to get. But for approvals, we'll go as low as 660 on most deals. But I mean, I'm usually seeing over 700s in most cases. But it's a good and especially with co-ops, if you have a 680, I would say it's more challenging to get into a co-op.
Yeah. And do you look for reserves post closing?
Yes. So basically, loans, we have what's called conforming loan amounts, which is up to about $648,000, and then above that is jumbo. So reserves are whatever your housing payment is. The bank requires a certain amount of months of housing payment in reserves, and you could use retirement money, you could use liquid money for that. Usually for loans up to 648,000, it's basically 2 to 4 months of whatever the housing payment is. Once you get into the higher loan amounts, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, it could be 12 months or 24 months, depending on the size. I think 2 million or higher could be 2 years, 24 months of whatever the housing payment is. But usually in that 500 to $1 million range, it's like 4 months of the housing payment. And that's what we go for.
So a question just regarding the number of times that you can run credit before it affects people's credit score. A lot of people have this question like, hey, look, I don't want to run my credit because I don't want it to ding my credit score. How does that work in the real estate world? Like if somebody were to ask you to run it and then somebody from Wells Fargo and then somebody from Citizens,
Right.
How does that work?
It's a great question. And I get my answer, honestly, from a credit professional that I work with. I'm not an expert in credit. I'm an expert in getting financing and getting deals approved. But from what I'm told, if you get your credit pulled within a 3-week period, it shouldn't negatively affect your scores. And if so, maybe it's a few points out of like 850, because the bureaus should know that you're pricing out different lenders, right? So you're allowed to have it pulled. But if you're going to have it pulled 4 or 5 times over a 2 or 3 month period, that's definitely going to hurt your scores a lot. But usually the 2 to 3 week window, and then once you have your credit pulled, it's good for 90 days. So you really don't need to have it pulled again until you hit that 90-day mark. In which case, if you haven't found a property at that point, then in order to update a pre-qualification, we would have to pull the credit again.
And so Danny had mentioned too earlier that we're sort of seeing or hearing the number like 7%. What are you seeing as far as rates go?
Up to 648, which is conforming, I'm seeing around 7%.
Okay.
But the jumbos, anything over 648, they're still around between 5 3/4 and 6%. So, and I mean, with prices, depending where they go, but I mean, if you're over 800,000 or 900,000, then you're probably in that 6% range. But anything under 7, but I've seen it was over 7, and now it's kind of come down a little bit to 7, maybe a shade under 7%. But forecasting, I personally think, I mean, if you asked me 3 or 4 months ago, I would have said middle of 23, you'd start to see them come down.
Okay.
So now I'm thinking 23 towards the end of 23. I think the Fed's going to raise rates 1 or 2 more times. And personally, I think there's going to be too much pressure, different economic pressures. I think there's going to be an unemployment effect from all of the rise in the inflation, that eventually unemployment will get affected. And when that gets too high, that's when the Fed jumps in and they start to put the brakes on the rate hikes. And in some cases, they'll even start to lower the rate. And I think that's when we'll see a back down of interest rates.
Okay.
Can't guarantee it, but that's what my crystal ball says. We'll see. But I'm
That's
optimistic.
great. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions for expert Eric? Yeah.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Yeah.
So the question was, do you suggest to get a pre-qualification before you go looking for houses?
And
Correct.
It's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. Because you don't want to waste your time or these guys' time. Like if you thinking, oh, I'm going to buy like a $700,000 or $800,000 apartment, but you can't afford more than $500,000-600,000, you want to know that before you fall in love with the apartment, and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, I can't afford it. So I mean, I know these guys, when they first start talking with potential buyers, one of the first things they say is,
are you pre-qualified?
Right.
Yeah.
And if they
we
say
will
no,
definitely make sure that you're there,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we want to have a very, very good understanding of what it is that you're working for or working with, so that we aren't wasting your time, but then our time collectively as well. It's mutually beneficial.
And the
for us
buying
to make sure
process
that-
is already an emotional roller coaster. So for you thinking that, hey, this place is within my reach, and then we get to a point where you get
It's not.
denied, we want to prevent that from happening.
so the credit report is good for 90 days. So basically, it's as good until the credit report expires, and then I would need to pull it again. But during the process, you can, come back, almost every day if you want. Hey, I looked at another property, it's this amount of money, and the maintenance is, $1,500. Can I still afford this? I run it through. I put in the new information. I run it through that automated underwriting system. It spits out the answer. I get the pre-qual, and you have it like the same day. So, and that could change. And then after 90 days, the credit report has to be pulled on both the pre-qual and the pre-qual. So even if we go into like submission where the loan application has been sent to underwriting, it's the same thing. It's as long as the credit report is good for. The other documents, like if your salary, is something else we want to get into, is If you're salaried, we're going to ask for pay stub and W-2s. If you're self-employed, I'm going to ask for the last 2 years' tax returns and maybe even a profit and loss year to date. If we're past, April 15th and taxes have been filed, we're going to ask for year to date profit and loss if you're self-employed. There's a shelf life to all these documents. So after a certain amount of time, I'm going to ask you for updated documents, but your approval won't expire because I'll make sure I get the documents back in time. All right. Another good answer to your question with regards to finding out how much you can afford is the information it gives you. Now, let's say you want to be in that 800,000 to 900,000 range, but right now I'm saying you're in 6 to 7, and you know what? You said, let me take 6 months, 10 months to put money away so I can afford that. Now you have a plan, right? Now you can talk to these guys and say, hey, you know what? I really want to hit this level. I spoke to Eric. I know what I have to do. I'm going to tie my belt. I'm going to, not go out. I'm going to drink coffee less. I'm going to sock it away. At least Another example is I've had self-employed borrowers. So if you're self-employed, you have to have at least 2 years of self-employment. Like the bank wants to see that you have steady income and that you're going to be successful at what you're doing. So I've had plenty of people who are like, oh, I just started, 6 months ago or 10 months ago, and they might be killing it, but they won't get qualified because they don't have it. So I've told people, listen, I need 2 years, keep up what you're doing, make the money that you want to make, and then, we can get you pre-qualified. Another example is a lot of people who own their own business, when they're doing their taxes, they want to limit their tax liability as much as they can, right? So they're putting in their accountant is putting in as many expenses in their taxes so that they don't pay that much tax. So they know that if they file or they show less expenses and it'll increase their income, they'll be able to buy in the level they want to. So I've had clients who I've told this information, and sure enough, 2 years later, they're like, all right, I did what I had to with my tax returns. Here they are. I didn't write off all those expenses and, my wife's vacations and whatnot, and now I can, and they come back and, we get them approved. So it's also informational for people, whether, salary or self-employed. So you have a game plan.
Yeah, so you said the less expensive is better. So.
For getting a mortgage,
Right.
right? There are, pros and cons for each of them. Right? If you have your own business and you want to make as much money and take home as much money, that's great. But if you want to get a mortgage, not so great. Right? So you kind of have to for 2 years until you get where you want to go as far as buying a property. Then after you close, do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a balancing act because you do want to save up as much cash for your down payment, but you also want to make sure that your income is strong.
Right.
So, so that we can chat more about the strategies. And then I also wanted to ask you a bit about what you're seeing, types of loans. So we're hearing a lot about ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages versus conventional or fixed.
All right, so there's the 30-year fixed rate where you get your rate, call it 7%, and say the monthly payment is $1,000 a month. For 30 years, you make that payment, $1,000 a month, say it's a $500,000 loan. After 30 years, it's paid off. The rate's fixed, your payment's fixed, and that's it. ARM, which stands for adjustable rate mortgage, and we'll take a 7-year ARM, for instance. It's still a 30-year term, so the money is due back to the bank over 30 years, except the interest rate is fixed for 7 years. Because it's fixed for a shorter period of time, the bank is going to give you a lower interest rate. So let's say a 30-year fix is 7%, the 7-year ARM would be 6.25%, because you're accepting the risk that after 7 years, it could go to wherever the market is. So the thinking now is with interest rates rising and people thinking that down the road they're going to come back down, they'd rather take the 7-year ARM knowing that they could refinance into hopefully a lower rate down the line. So it's still a 30-year term. So it's the payments are fixed over, not fixed, the payments are stretched out over 30 years, calculated over 30 years, I should say. But the rate's fixed for 7. After those 7 years, it's going to adjust every 6 months until the end of the term. The thinking is you're going to do something within those 7 years, whether it's refinance, sell the property, or just go to wherever the market is at that point. Because there are times where the rates come back down and your rate could be better even without refinancing. I've seen that happen as well. Mm-hmm. But the thought is, as you said, date the rate, which I guess kind of makes me a matchmaker. I put you in the best product based on what your goals are. And you hear ARM, it stands for adjustable rate mortgage, which is the difference between fixed rate mortgage. Adjustable could change after a certain fixed period of time. Co-ops condos, there's a big difference in closing costs. Two main reasons. One is title insurance. You don't need to get title insurance with a co-op. Title insurance basically ensures that you own the property. When you buy a co-op, you're buying shares in a corporation, and there's a stock certificate that you get, and the bank takes that stock certificate. That's our insurance. And that could be thousands of dollars. That's one thing. There's another thing called New York State Mortgage Recording Tax, and that's a percentage of the loan amount that the lovely state of New York, they're handed to your pocket, and it's 1.9% of the loan amount. So on a $500,000 loan, you're talking about almost $9,000 in this one tax. Now the state can impose it on you because it's technically real property. When you're buying co-op, again, you're buying shares in a corporation, it's not considered real property. So they can't impose that on you. So, the difference, closing costs for a co-op are usually in the $4,500 range, where the same purchase price condos could be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000.
Right.
So it's something to think about when you're thinking about how much money you have and what kind of property you wanna buy.
Yeah,
So,
that's great.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
all
To
right,
sort of
thanks,
simplify
guys.
things too, our sort of estimate is, if you're going to buy a co-op, the closing costs are approximately 1% to 2% of the purchase price, and if it's a condo, it's in that 4% range, just for back of the envelope or back of the napkin sort of calculation. So, thank you so much,
All right,
Eric.
thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks,
Appreciate it.
So I'm just going to touch a little bit on the difference between a co-op and a condo. As Eric brought up, co-ops are, we're in a co-op right now. Typically, this is not a great example, but typically the co-op is it's a corporation that owns the building. In Manhattan, you're going to see like land lease buildings where the co-op doesn't own the land, so they're renting the land. In the building that we're in now, there's actually a different owner of the building, and the co-op rents from that landlord. It's very atypical, but that's a different conversation for another day that we can have. But generally, a co-op is this corporation that owns the property, and then you, as a shareholder, purchase shares of stock in that corporation. And you're allocated then based on your number of shares. So each unit in the apartment is allocated a certain number of shares based on how the offering plan was written when they originally created the corporation. And John can talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. So co-ops do come with some restrictions versus a condo, for example. With co-ops, because because all the shareholders in the building have to split expenses, they do have a mortgage that they pay sometimes on a building. They have the real estate taxes that they have to pay. They're paying heat, water, etc. They want to make sure that everybody in the building is doing their part. And the way that they collect funds is through a maintenance fee. So the maintenance fee typically, it includes your real estate taxes, it includes maintenance of the building, along with some other expenses. In a condo, you're gonna see there's a similar fee called common charges. So with a condo, you actually do get a deed. It is real property. You are purchasing the four walls. And it does come with some less restrictions. So with a co-op, they're going to possibly have some restrictions on subletting, for example. You might be able to sublet your apartment for 2 out of 5 years. And they may charge you a fee on top of that. They may tell you that you can't have any pets. And they may tell you that you have to you're allowed to purchase with a maximum down payment of 30%, where somewhere else may allow 20%. So about, I would say 80% of property in New York is co-op.
Ish, 70%.
70, yeah, so somewhere around there. So you're gonna see that co-ops typically are a little less expensive than condos. And when you are purchasing in a condo, you do have a few more liberties. You can typically, I like to say typically because not every building is run the same way, but you can usually sublet as you see fit. Investors are usually going to purchase in a condo versus a co-op, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think for condos, definitely you typically have more control and you have more flexibility. With co-ops, less control, less flexibility, but at a lower price point.
Yep.
Generally about 20% lower than a condo. So it depends on where you are in your first purchase, second purchase, or so forth. Some people start off in co-ops, and then they get to a certain point, and they're like, okay, now I've built up enough equity in this first apartment, then I can sell this, and then make my way into a condo. Just depends.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're still in step one here. So you're still figuring out what's right for you. So now you know the difference between a co-op, a condo, and then you have your townhouses. You also want to think through, like, what neighborhoods do you want to be in? Do you want to be close to work? Do you want to be close to restaurants that you love? You know, think about transportation. What works for you? So come up with a list of neighborhoods that you would prefer to live in, and then from there, you're also going to assemble your team. So you have your real estate agents that will help you throughout this process. You're gonna talk to your mortgage lender, such as Eric. You're gonna, we'll introduce you to an attorney, such as John Skolnick, who you're about to meet. And then, you know, we'll put you in touch with inspectors and contractors that you may need along the way. And then once you have your understanding of what you can afford, where you want to live, we're going to go out there and we're going to search for properties that fit what you're looking for. So we're going to look to see the size that works for you, number of bedrooms, how many bathrooms you need, whether it's pet friendly or not. And during this phase, you as the buyer should do some tours. Go see what you like, what you don't like, and try to eliminate things that are going to pretty much waste your time.
Yeah, in fact, we do. It's very, very important to have a good understanding of what's on the market. So as many as you can go out there and see, that's just very, very helpful for you. So you understand what it is, sort of like what's the competitive set, what are you going up against, and sort of what can you buy, right? I guess I'll stop there.
It's fun going to open houses
Yeah.
as well. So Sundays can be, Sunday afternoon, carve out a few hours, go check out open houses.
And there's also a very good chance, we're here, we are, combing through inventory, trying to see if we can find a great fit for you, and we send things over for our clients. But then there's also a very good chance that you're going to be scrolling, you know what you're looking for, and you're going to find the apartment and send it to us and say, hey, in addition to the other appointments that we have, could you also schedule another appointment like this? That happens too, right? So it's really sort of a team effort.
Yep. Yeah, so once you find the one, you've been through your different neighborhoods, you've been through different buildings and seeing what works for you, you find the one, and it's time to submit an offer. And we're going to help you negotiate those terms, from price to potentially closing costs. And one thing to note in a new development, the sponsor, so the building's developer, who we call the sponsor, they typically like to pass along certain closing costs to the purchaser. So those include your transfer taxes, their attorney fee, and then some other miscellaneous fees that they might want you to pick up. So in a market that is, I guess, a little on the weaker side, so stronger for the buyers, we're going to negotiate and ask that the sponsors pay for all of that, and maybe even ask for a little more. So we're going to see if there are any fixtures that you like in the apartment. Do you like the furniture? So these are all things that you can include in your offer to see what we can get from the seller. And
even timing is a big thing, because some sellers need to stay in their apartment before they find something else, or they bought another place, they're not going to close for a little while. So sometimes we can do a sale and lease back. It just depends on what sort of flexibility there is with both the seller and the buyer, and there could be an opportunity to get you a win there as well.
Yep. So there are times where the seller is like, "Hey, I need a year, or
I need more
6
flexibility,
months."
right? And the other buyer doesn't have it. But if you've got the flexibility, then we're going to go with you. So we want to make sure that we understand all the considerations that the seller is going through, so that we can go out there and we can sort of attack each one and see how we can get you the best deal.
Yeah, and then once we have an accepted offer, we're going to go back and forth possibly a couple of times. The listing agent will put together what they call a deal sheet, and that's going to include all the terms of the deal, including contact details for the buyer, the seller, the real estate agents involved, the attorneys involved, and then that deal sheet then goes off to the attorneys along with building financials, an offering plan, and a number of other documents that our attorneys will sift through. And at this time, I'd like to invite John Skolnick to the floor.
Come on out, John.
Thank you,
Hey guys, how
John.
are you?
Very good, very good.
All right, how's everybody doing? Feeling good? There's no pressure here. So I love, like, Peter and Danny are great, okay? And they've talked about making sure you guys are all prepared as buyers, which is really important. And then what they've done is they've given you wine and cheese. They've had you here like an hour, hour and a half. And they bring me in with like the coolest material ever, which is like attorney due diligence. I'm probably like, everybody dreams about that stuff, right? So, I mean, how many of you out there sat around when you were a small child dreaming about being a real estate agent? This guy, don't everybody raise your hand at once. Like, I know it's almost as cool as firefighter and astronaut, but I'm just going to touch a little bit on attorney due diligence. As you can see, I like to try to keep it light. It is a serious subject, you know, buying a house. You bought a home before, you know it's stressful. We try to relieve that stress for our clients by knowing everything that you need to know, conveying it to you when you need to know it, trying not to overwhelm you with all that stuff. And we try to keep it light because that's just who we are. So how many of you grew up like in a house? Most of them. So I don't know if any of you had my dad at your house, but like, you know, like the pipe broke and he was like, oh, duct tape, fix that, no problem, right? Like the gray, the other colored ones didn't work. The gray one was great for plumbing, right? So one of the things, really the main things that we're looking at when we're doing attorney due diligence, when you're buying a co-op and a condo, is financially what's going on in the building and any sort of like big projects that the condo and co-op are going to make the decision on and that you don't make the decision on, right? So if you lived in that house with my dad, weird, you know, then you do an inspection of the house and you're like, okay, the boiler's like a little old and clunky, and the seller's like, oh yeah, no, the plumber said you just kick it a little bit and that's how it starts. That's normal, don't worry about that. You know, you look at it, you do your inspection, your inspector will tell you, listen, that's got like 2 or 3 years or 2 to 3 minutes, whatever. You know, and you calculate that into your offer. All right, I offered $1 million, but now I gotta redo the roof and I gotta take out the boiler and maybe the electrical is a little wonky. The first house I ever bought, I actually remained friends with these people, so I'm at a Halloween party. The socket, the electrical outlet in one of the kids' rooms went out, like, put half of the electric out of the house, and the guy was like, oh, the electrician was over, he said, you just hit it and it should be good? I was like, where did you get the electrician? That must have been YouTube, I guess, I don't know. So we got that taken care of. But when you own a house, you can make all those decisions, right? What do you want to do with the plumbing? What do you want to do with the roof? When you buy into a co-op or condo, you can make the decision if the wall's scratched and, you know, if there's a minor leak in the sink, you can decide how you want to address it. But let's say here, like this co-op looks like it has heat that comes from the building, right? It's just the radiator, generally controlled by a boiler, you know, that the building owns and operates. So you don't get to control those systems. You don't get to make all those decisions. There's a lot of laws in New York City that buildings have to comply with like this. Local law 11 is a very common one some people might have heard of. That's the facade, right? So all buildings over a certain size are required to inspect the facade of the building, make sure no bricks are falling out for all the people walking on the street. Makes sense. It's a good law. There's local law 97, which is a newer law, energy efficiency, converting over to more energy efficient heating and cooling systems, okay? What we're doing when we're doing due diligence is to try to get information for you to let you know if there are going to be big financial changes coming up when you move into the building, right? Like we were talking about, the difference with a house, you can make those calls, you could do the inspection, you have a good idea. Once we get a deal sheet, we work on 2 things in parallel. Obviously your contract, we'll start negotiating with the seller's attorney, we'll share that information with you, and at the same time, we're gonna do due diligence. What that consists of is reviewing the financials of the building, review the offering plan and amendments, we're looking at the layout of the building, we'll tell you where to look in the offering plan. A lot of times we don't get to see the place. So we'll say, hey, this is where you need to look in the offering plan to check the layout. We're not there. We can look at the pictures online, but you need to tell us, like, did something change in the building so we can check the building department records to see if the people filed permits for the changes. Did the changes that they made required permits? If they moved that a foot, nobody's going to know. If they added 3 bedrooms that weren't here before, that's something that probably should have been filed and could be an issue for people. The biggest thing, again, that we really look for is sort of the financial aspect. So we never like to look at financials in a vacuum. We can look at a building financials and be like, okay, great, it's got a reserve account that's 20% of the annual budget. Everything looks good. They've operated in the positive for the last couple of years. And you look at it and you're like, okay, everything's good. And then you talk to the managing agent and you're like, oh, by the way, we're replacing all the windows. We got to redo the roof. We're taking out both elevators and we're putting in a new boiler. And you're like, oh, the $300,000 that you might have had in reserves. Well, that's great, except you just named like $3 million in projects. So how are you paying for all of that? Okay. That's what we're looking to do in due diligence. Again, because this topic is so super exciting, I find that it's a little bit easier to tell these things in stories. Real world just happened yesterday. Have a client buying a $920,000 condo. We negotiated, we got the deal on Thursday. There was pressure to get it signed quickly because there's another offer for cash that was like $20,000 less. We had the contract negotiated in a day. They sent the contract Thursday. By Friday, we were done. Client was doing the inspection over the weekend, and we were waiting for responses from the management company. So I spoke to the building manager like Friday afternoon. I'm like, hey, I haven't heard from you. Very common, right?
Oh, yeah.
You usually have to contact the managing agent anywhere from 3 to 742 times to get one response. That's the average in New York City.
And then they get mad at you.
Yeah. How you following up? I responded to you 14 days ago. So I can't call them on Friday. He's in his car. He's like, I'm pulling over. I'm like, you don't need to pull over. You can call me when you get. He's like, no, it's okay. So I was like, you know the deal, like small 9-unit building. I was like, we're just trying to find out like, what's going on in the building, any big changes to the finances, and all of a sudden, like the friendly call was kind of like, can't really talk about that just yet. So I was like, oh, red flag,
Yeah,
so I mentioned to my client, I'm like, listen, great, we're in good position, do your inspection. Sounds like there might be something going on. We get the due diligence back, we get our questionnaire back on Monday. That was very thorough, which is completely atypical for managing agents in New York City. And turns out that the building is talking about a $150,000 project to redo the facade because they've had leaks over the last like 3 to 4 years. They've tried to patch them. It's a 9-unit building. 3 apartments had leaks. They were doing patch jobs. It was $2,500 here, $1,500 there. It didn't work, and they're like, oh, by the way, this is coming up. So I spoke to my client. Like, it's really preliminary. It's hard to know, even they don't know exactly how much they're talking about, but $150,000 sounds pretty reasonable. I spoke to the broker on the deal. She happens to be the board president of her small building, and she had done facade work. So I'm like, does that, sound like the right number? I said, I'm a real estate attorney. We tell people all the time, we see the contracts. We'll help you make sure your deal goes through, but I don't see the place that you're buying. I could look online, and I don't know number. I'm not a contractor, so I don't know how much things cost. I advise people to talk to professionals in that regard. So, we were able to ascertain that the estimate that they got for the facade work that they need to do was pretty solid. It put her share of the possible upcoming work at about anywhere between $18,000 to $25,000 based on her percentage of ownership in the condominium. So that's the one thing that we're always trying to do when we complete due diligence, is to give our clients information to make an informed decision. The one thing that I hate, and I'm sure Peter and Danny hate, is when attorneys try to make the decisions for the clients. I'm not living there. I mean, unless you really like me and you want to take care of my kids and you want me to live in this, I'm not living there. I don't have to pay the bills. It's up to you. What we like to do is just make sure to gather up that information and let our clients make an informed decision. We'll go over all the possible scenarios and the possible things that we can do to address the situation. But ultimately, I just like to give the information and the knowledge to my clients and let them make that decision. So the things we discussed with this client was, one, we know there's an all-cash offer. We know the all-cash offer is $20,000 less than her offer. The seller has told us that they're just looking for top dollar. They don't care whose it is. They just want top dollar. So she ultimately decided, we figured it's about 18 to 25 on the high end, probably close to like 18 to 20,000 on the assessment. She asked for a $10,000 credit. The seller's broker came back and said the seller only agreed to 5. So they asked me to reach out with a couple of more options, and I emailed them before I came here, and I haven't heard back, so I can't tell you the end of the story just yet.
To be continued.
But like the options are, what we proposed was like, okay, listen, your guy doesn't think it's going to cost that much. That's fine. We can live with that. Give us a $5,000 credit. Put $5,000 in escrow when we close. And if the assessment comes out within a year of when we close, then if it's more than $10,000, we get the $5,000 and we'll pay the rest. And if it's less, we'll pay whatever it is and you can get the rest of your money. So, that's what we do when we do due diligence. We try to walk our clients through that so they can make a good decision and be comfortable going into contract. That's just like a little snippet on due diligence. I'm not the best speaker, but I'm a good talker. So if you guys have questions, start firing away. If you need to get up and stretch out and then fire away with questions.
What about the local law 97? Because that seems to be coming up more and more and more. And this idea that some people might be living in a co-op right now or in a building right now where all of a sudden they're getting hit with these massive assessments. Are you seeing more of that? Or just, can you give us a little bit of color as to what are you seeing with the local law 97?
Except I have to ask Google when it takes effect. No, I don't know exactly. The energy, it's basically an energy compliance rule, and Google is great, by the way. They can tell you when that stuff actually goes into effect. They've adopted the law, but they've given buildings, I think it's like 2025 or 2027.
Yep.
2025. Yeah, depending on the size of the building, for when they have to comply with it could be 27 in certain instances. When they have to comply with like the energy efficiency rules. Mainly, it's seeing a lot of older buildings convert over from oil to gas, and again, it depends on the size of the building. It depends what they're using for heating and cooling. A lot of newer like a lot of newer units, co-ops, condos will have those, in-wall electric heating and cooling systems. Those mini splits can do both.
Yep.
There's not really much for them to do. If a building is, one of those pre-war co-ops, it could have, one of those scary, like Home Alone oiler burners in the basement that makes noise and scary Halloween stuff for you. And then it could be a very big expenditure.
Yeah.
This city has also gotten much more aggressive and diligent, I think, and for good reason, with being careful with plumbing and gas situations. We've seen it in a lot of different buildings where one person reported a gas leak in a pipe, and the city comes and tests, and they shut down the whole building and require them to do pressure testing to make sure that the whole system is safe. Not a plumber, never seen it. My brother was a firefighter. My brother-in-law was a firefighter, so he knows the equipment, but we have seen buildings that have gone through that. And again, it can be a very big expenditure for the building, for sure. So,
cool.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about like what happens at closing or like on the way to closing?
What happens at closing? Excellent question. So closings have changed a lot actually since COVID. It's not as perfect as I'd like it to be. That's because I'm a little bit type A and neurotic. But closings have gone more remote and escrow style like the rest of the country. Pretty much most of the rest of the country, over 40 states, are what we call like escrow closings, where the title company basically handles everything. They gather up the documents from the seller that need to be signed, take them into the title company. They get all the documents for the bank signed, take them in, they get all the funds from the buyer and the bank, and then disperse them out to the seller. New York has always been, like you mentioned before, when you purchase, there's like an attorney for every party. Co-op closings has a co-op attorney, seller's attorney, buyer's attorney, payoff attorney. It's like way too many attorneys. There should never be that many attorneys allowed in one room, certainly not at a small table. But co-op closings have become a little bit more modern. With a lot of our sellers, you can pre-sign closing documents and send them into closing, and then your attorney, like in our case, with a lot of our sellers, we'll get everything we need from our clients. We'll get the documents to closing. We'll have the proceeds wired to our escrow account. And once they tell us they're done signing and we're good to release the money, we tell everybody the closing's over and we just wire the money to the clients. As a buyer, you still need to attend. New York state law and the banks don't allow you to pre-sign loan documents. So they'll say like the note and the mortgage aren't effective if they're signed before the date of the actual closing. So it prevents it from being like completely remote and digital. No lenders in New York will really allow online notarization and they won't accept digital signatures on the promissory note, which is the promise to pay the money back. Lenders have gone more digital, so they'll let you sign like half of the closing package digitally in some instances, which does reduce the amount of time at the closing because you're only signing, maybe 10 or 15 documents instead of 45.
So if you live out of state, do you have to come to closing?
You don't have to come to closing if you're a purchaser, but you would have to give a power of attorney generally to your attorney because, again, those loan documents need to be executed. And if you're getting a mortgage, the lender's attorney isn't authorized to release the funds from the mortgage proceeds unless they have the original signed documents at closing. So that is one limitation. If you happen to be lucky enough, you have super rich parents that want to buy you a place and you're all cash, then you actually don't need to attend at all. You just wire the money. Like we've had plenty of all cash purchasers out of state. They just wire us money. We make sure we have everything we need from the seller. The buyer only has to sign a couple of things when they're all cash. So we handle everything for them, get the documents signed. Doesn't matter if they're signed the day of, the day after. It's fine. So.
What's the fastest you've ever closed on a property? Helped a client close?
We've done some like all cash houses in like 2 weeks.
So 2 weeks. Okay.
Yeah, that was really, again, like we knew it was coming. Everybody wanted to go fast. Ordered title before we were even in contract, got everything done on a rush. That's really the exception.
Okay.
One of the questions I get from from other state real estate agents or buyers is why does it take so long to close in New York, where like in California they can close in a few days?
It doesn't have to. I mean, usually the limitation in New York is the lender's clearance to close, and like Eric touched on before, these days it is possible to go a lot faster. I mean, when everybody came back from COVID, the banks were inundated with volume, and it was taking 60 to 75 days to get it clear to close, and we can't close without the bank's money. Mm-hmm. So that's one limitation. The title reports, again, COVID impacted that. A lot of the county clerk's offices slowed down, took weeks and months to get title reports back, which we can't close without. But if you're all cash and you're buying a condo or a house, or if you're working with a good loan officer like Eric, he'll get you cleared fixed. He will get you cleared quickly. Then you can close quickly. Obviously, there are multiple parties involved. Sometimes we'll have, I want to close in 3 weeks. I want to close in 30 days. You're like, what's the seller doing? They're part of the transaction too. So if they're still living there and they don't know where they're going, obviously we have to account for their time and desires as well. And then, of course, co-ops are obviously the worst, because as you mentioned, you have the board interview. So I don't know if I've ever seen a co-op close in like less than 30 days. Be like a unicorn out there somewhere that like.
Generally speaking, to close on a condo, you'd say it's about 60 days in total since the time that we get into contract. And then for co-ops, it's about 90 days, right?
Yeah.
So 2 to 3 months generally you could expect once we have identified the property to get to closing.
Yeah. That's about, we usually say exactly that. With financing, 60 plus or minus 15 on either side, again, depending on how fast or slow everybody wants to go, how quickly everything goes with the bank. And then the co-ops, obviously, the limitation of the board. So.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, John.
Cool.
You're very welcome. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
All right. So that was a bit of due diligence, a little of the closing process, what to expect. We're going to now head into step 5. So we've flown through 1 through 4. We're in step 5. Next is the mortgage application, which Eric had touched on. And this is where the bank is going to want to see all the documents that he had mentioned to you, your pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In parallel, so you'll see step 6, you have your co-op condo application. This is, 99% of co-ops will require board approval, and this is where they'll have a whole assortment of requests for you. So they're going to want to see, very similar to what the bank is asking for, they're going to see your pay stubs, tax returns, employment reference letters, landlord reference letter, personal reference letter, business reference letter, et cetera, et cetera. We actually listed out quite a few of examples of what they'll ask for. This is, I'd like to say, a bit invasive. Like a lot of people, get a little offended, but it's not. It's just that the co-op does want to make sure that they know who is purchasing into their building.
Yeah, they want to make sure that it's going to be a good, friendly neighbor who's not going to cause problems for everybody else, right? So
Yeah, so exactly. They want to know that you're friendly. They want to know that people like you because they do look at it as like a
Friends.
community.
yes.
And they also want to make sure that you can afford the place.
Yeah.
So they don't want to have to worry about you potentially defaulting on your payments and then they would have to pick up your expenses, right? So once you get through this package, us as your real estate agents, we would help you through this entire process. You would gather the documents, we would help put it in a presentable manner. We would then submit this to the managing agent, who would then do their review. They would see if they have any additional questions or follow-ups, maybe any comments. We try to get it to a place where there aren't any comments and it's just easy for them to review. And then once the management company is comfortable, they will then send it off to the board for board review. That timing on that depends. So first we need a commitment letter from the bank saying that they are comfortable lending to you. Once you have the commitment letter, then we can submit this board application. So it depends how long it takes to get your commitment letter, which again can either take a few days nowadays, or it can take 45 days, depending how fast you can get your documents to the bank. Once the board reviews, it can take anywhere from a few days to a month, maybe 6 weeks, depending. And that is something that we would like to know in advance, how long that process should take, so this way we can gauge the rest of our lives.
Generally, though, buildings are doing a pretty good job of reviewing the packages and even interviewing people within a timely manner because of Zoom, and they can do this stuff virtually now. So it doesn't take, sometimes you'd have to wait for a board meeting in order to go and talk with the board in order to have that interview. That has really been condensed. So we're seeing things closer to like the 2 and 3 week approval time, I think, in general.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be faster than that.
Yeah, sometimes faster. So before the approval, you're going to get called for an interview. And this is where the board is going to want to meet the buyer. They're going to ask you some questions. They're going to mostly talk about the house rules of the building. They're going to walk you through, the pet policy, and just tell you a little bit about the day-to-day life in the building. You're going to see in your folder, we've listed out some pointers on how to pass a co-op board interview. And it's not like a job interview. You want to come in, be as humble as possible. You don't want to tell them that their building needs work. you want to agree that you love the building, and that you just want to show that you're going to be a nice, good neighbor. So after the board interview, you're going to then either get your approval or rejection. So let's say you are approved, we get to move on to, actually this is step 7 that we just talked through. So once we get our approval, we're going to move on to step 8, which is then final closing. So you get your approval, you let your lender know that you've gotten your approval. From there, you're going to get your clearance to close. And then once you have your clearance to close, the attorneys can do their work and schedule or get the closing scheduled. So, it is a bit of scheduling nightmare, it could be sometimes. You have to work with the buyer's schedule, the seller's schedule, the buyer's attorney, the seller's attorney, the co-op's attorney, the bank's attorney,
The managing agent, yes.
the managing
Yes,
agent, the
yes,
transfer agent.
I think the other thing there too, we were just talking about this earlier with John and Eric, is that buyers sometimes they can feel very, very confident that okay, I've got the signed contract, we're about ready to close, and during that time you're excited because you're about ready to buy an apartment. So you bought some furniture, you might have bought a new car to go into the garage that you just bought that goes along with your condo, and all of a sudden you've opened up new lines of credit and you put more debt onto your account. Do not do that. You want to make sure that and even if we were talking about this earlier too, even if you have a line of credit that's been open, a lot of times if you've got a line of credit that's been open for 10, 15 years, don't close it, right? Like that is, as long as there's not a lot of debt on it, keep it open. So don't make any major changes to your credit profile or any major purchases or things like that that might affect your debt to income ratio.
Yeah. If you find a little itch that you want to close something, give us a call, give Eric a call, and we'll chat through it. Yeah, and then once the closing is scheduled, John talked about what to expect during closing, and then you get your keys and you get to move into your new home.
Celebrate. Yes.
Yeah. So, any questions?
I think we have one in the back.
So after closing, can I just use credit again? Like it's fine. Okay, I just have to wait after.
Yeah. Once the apartment's yours, yeah, you're good.
Yeah, you can quit your job if you want.
So,
Yeah, so I want to thank everyone for coming out today. I had a good time. I hope you did too. And
thanks for hanging in there with us. Appreciate it. Definitely.
Yeah, and then for any of these resources, if you want digital versions, we will send them to you. We will also, this will be posted on YouTube and other forms of social media, so you can always tune back in. And for everyone that has been watching digitally, thank you for spending the time with us. And we are also including a link to our buyer's guide, so you will have that. And if you want any further resources, just feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah,
Our
give us a
contact
call.
info it will also be included.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you.